One thing I really enjoy doing on this channel is looking at all the things that you guys send me about what you want to hear and what you want me to talk about. And one recurring theme that keeps coming up time and time again is people send me an email saying, "Hey, Michael, have you ever heard of the Great Taking? If not, you should look into it." People have sent me, the book suggestion to read the book, different videos about it, and things like that. So I want to talk about this today because it's something I've never talked about before here on the channel. It's a fresh idea, at least for me. And I want to discuss what this is so that way people who don't know understand what it is and how this affects us all. All this is based on a book that's actually called The Great Taking. And the author is David Webb, who actually is somebody who used to work on Wall Street for many years. So somebody who really is entwined into the financial markets and has seen a thing or two in his lifetime. He managed billions of dollars in money, and he worked with hedge funds, investment banks, and even former Treasury officials during his career. And the Great Taking is referring to a situation where essentially all of your assets under management that are in the stock market or in your bank account or things like that could be seized on a moment's notice, and there's not much you could really do about it. And when I heard that, that really freaked me out, and I wanted to look more into it as well. So the Great Taking doesn't really just talk about economic collapse. It kind of talks about a system that's already built and already in place. And basically, David suggests that over decades, there have been small legal and regulatory tweaks that have quietly rewired ownership in modern finance. So the result of this is that we no longer own most of our financial assets in a direct and legal sense. All that fine print, those things that you have to sign, all those little disclaimers when you sign up for an account, all that crap is hidden within those disclaimers. That's all drawn up by these criminal mastermind attorneys that want this all to be able to work in the favor of the institution who's forcing you to sign it in order to set up an account. So things like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, even your cash deposits in the bank can all technically sit under custodians and clearinghouses. What he says that you have isn't true ownership. It's called a security entitlement. That means that you are entitled to the value of an asset, but not the asset itself. And this protects the system and the institutions, but not you. Surprise, surprise. And so the reason that they have it this way and set up this way, the excuse for all of this is so the system can survive a crash by taking control of everything inside of it if need be. And so all of the fine print with every account you've ever opened kind of grants these rights to the institution that you're signing up with. Things like in a systemic emergency, those agreements allow your holdings to be frozen, pooled, reallocated, or even converted into another form of credit. Kind of like the situation that's been brought to my attention several times by many of you called a bank bail-in, where essentially you as a deposit holder end up footing the bill for all the bank's bad financial choices, and they end up seizing your money in order to redistribute it however they would like. That's a great example of this Great Taking. And these are not just theories. These are clauses that are actually written into your custodial and brokerage agreements under the Uniform Commercial Code, known as the UCC. So every time you go to open an account of any sort from now on, every time you click, "I agree," without even realizing what you're consenting to, the system can essentially seize control of your assets that you're signing up for. And this is not considered theft. This is 100% legal because you are giving that right at the time of signature. And so it's impossible to know how a real life situation like this could actually turn out, but we can kind of paint a picture of how this could theoretically happen. It could just be any normal day on Wall Street, the market opens up, and it's business as usual, okay? But deep inside a massive clearinghouse, an algorithm might detect an abnormal liquidity stress, and a hidden line of code quietly activates called the Emergency Continuity Protocol. This is something I have never heard of before, but this is coming from somebody who worked on Wall Street. This is not something that anybody's going to know about. It's something that happens all behind the scenes, built into the framework of these algorithms for the trading platforms. And it's something you're not going to know about until it's too late. And so then what happens is liquidity across the repo market evaporates, and overnight lending freezes up, and major institutions start pulling back exposure, and a few money market funds might halt withdrawals out of caution. And then the financial media mentions minor turbulence, but the insiders already know what's going on, and the system is essentially seizing up and freezing in order to protect itself from further losses. And today I'm walking on Belvedere Drive, shout out to Belvedere, Illinois. And then you as the customer, you wake up and you open up your banking app and you look at your bank balance and it's blank. Or it says something like temporarily unavailable. That's why so many people are warning to have your money out of the banks and out of the system. Then wire transfers get delayed and ATMs seize up and won't let you take any money out. Brokerage firms announce maintenance updates so you're not able to access the platform. And within just 24 hours, pretty much every account faces some sort of restriction or another, and you don't have anything. We all know that keeping your personal information private in the age of the internet and the age of information is becoming more and more difficult. And that's why today's video is sponsored by Delete Me. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that will remove your personal information that's being sold online. And Delete Me's privacy experts remove you from hundreds of data brokers all year long. Delete Me is extremely simple to use. All you have to do is answer a few basic questions, and they will scour the entire internet to remove your personal information from a ton of different data broker websites that can be holding on to information like your name, your age, your address, your photos, your email, phone numbers, relatives information, social media, and the list goes on. I've been trusting Delete Me to protect my online privacy for almost 2 years now. You can do the same and make sure you get 20% off your Delete Me subscription by joining today using my link down below at joindeleteme.com/boardandarrow or use the QR code on the screen. Officials then might announce something called a stabilization window, and then the Federal Reserve will announce an emergency meeting where they're going to promise decisive action, and they of course are going to assure the public that the system is safe and everything's going to be back to normal soon. Well, if you believe anything that the Federal Reserve says, you're a pretty big fool right now, because everything they've said since 2022 and even well before that, let's be honest, has been a huge lie. But behind the scenes, what's really going on is all of your assets have been reclassified as collateral, and for the sake of systemic continuity, your money is no longer yours. It's part of the collective pool of resources that's now owned by all these companies. Now, I don't know if something like this would ever actually happen, because it does sound like a doomsday scenario to me. Like, if they did this, they're going to essentially make sure everybody is broke and poor overnight and take everything that people are holding on these platforms and banking institutions. And I just think there would be so much outrage and public unrest from this that there's no way they would get away with it. Society would collapse, in my opinion. This is really worst case scenario. So even though they technically have the legal right to do this, would it actually unfold this way? My thought is probably not. And because think about it like this. All these institutions, all these companies, what is their goal? The goal is to make money, right? To profit. Well, obviously, if they take all your money, they're making the biggest heist and getaway in history, and they're making a ton of profit, sure. However, they're going to lose all their customers. No one's ever going to sign up for any of these platforms ever again. Everyone's going to be broke, so they're not going to be able to afford to buy any products. Every business that relies on the financial institution will also go under, because no one will have any money. So what would be the end goal with this? You know what I mean? Just like this whole notion that AI is going to take all the jobs, like that seems to be pretty impractical in my opinion. Like AI can't take all the jobs, because if it did, there's going to be nobody left to buy all of the products and services that are being sold in the economy. A lot of people call me a doomsdayer and nothing but a doom and gloomer, but I am a realist, guys. And this is a realistic lens that I'm looking at these things through. Like, Could all this happen? Sure. Is it technically legal? Yeah. Is it probable? Probably not. I'm not in denial. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's unlikely. Could it happen on a smaller scale where some people might lose out? Probably, it could. Just like when we saw the bank failures a couple years ago, and some people who had too much money in the bank did end up losing some of that money. But back to the theory of all this. First of all, it's all legal, okay? There's nothing illegal about any of it. And the thing that's kind of different now compared to how things used to work is today you don't have any real stake. You know, in the old days, you had physical stock certificates, for example, with your name on it. But now your holdings are all digital entries inside custodial systems. These entities all actually hold the assets and you hold a right to them, which is also the same reason I tell people you need to own physical gold and silver because it's in your possession. No one is the custodian of that gold and silver on your behalf. You have a claim to it, no, because it's not in your possession. And if there is an emergency like the one we're talking about right here, you won't actually be able to access your gold and silver, which kind of makes it all pointless. But let's keep going with this scenario and try to look past whatever we just said and see how it could end up unfolding. Once the freeze actually happens, then the solution begins. And the government and central banks might introduce a federal stability credit in which every citizen receives an automatic balance in a new digital wallet, which is kind of like a CBDC. They're not real dollars. They're not programmable credits. They're issued by the central bank. Your old money is completely gone. You're never going to see it again. And this all gets marketed as modernization for a safer and smarter financial system. So based on everything we've talked about so far, you can protect yourself from this by owning physical assets. You can own real estate and land. You can own physical gold and silver. You can own commodities. You can own desirable products that people might need regardless of what's going on. You know, before money, people just traded, you know, there was a barter system in place where people traded things they needed for things that they didn't. And I think that if something like this were to happen, a lot of folks are going to return to that system and never look back after getting screwed over this royally. Because of course, if there is a CBDC introduced like the one we just mentioned, this is a complete framework of control. You know, they can limit your spending categories. They limit how much you get. They limit where you can spend the money and how much. There's instant taxation, so there's no hiding from that. And they're tracking everything you're doing. And of course, with the CBDC, they can even have expiration dates. So you have to spend the money. You cannot save it for a rainy day. You have to spend it now. Otherwise, it becomes worthless and you don't have it no more. And for some people, they might be like relieved, like, oh, I finally have some money again and my spending is back. But it comes at a high cost. And that high cost is you losing control over your own money. And then within just months, the system might fully transform where traditional banks merge into a unified national collateral management system. Say that one 3 times fast. And only accredited institutions can trade real securities. Retail investors get digital exposure through managed accounts, not ownership. And small businesses need allocation licenses to receive payments. Everything becomes programmable and trackable. And you can still, you know, work and shop and live, but your privacy and your autonomy completely vanishes overnight. And there's no more real choice because you're kind of being forced and controlled by the system. And that's where this whole notion of you'll own nothing and be happy comes from. Well, I think if this happened, you will own nothing and no one will be happy. People will be outraged and it would be war, guys. That's what I think. I don't think I've ever said that word on my channel, but I think it really would be a war of the people versus everybody who's in charge of doing this kind of stuff. And that's my number one base case of why I don't think it's going to play out like this, because these people know that this would just be so much of a robbery and no one's going to just take it lying down. And obviously some of this is underway and it is happening right now. Like, for example, over 100 central banks across the world are testing CBDCs, which stands for central bank digital currencies. And the UCC revisions that define digital asset control are already adopted in many of the US states. The DTCC and other clearinghouses already have custody over nearly all of the global securities. And after the 2008 crash, a lot of the reforms gave them resolution authority to seize collateral in a crisis. I think that they could use that authority, and how it would really look, in my opinion, is they might shut everything down temporarily if there's massive losses in the market, for example. Make it so you can't access your brokerage account, you can't make a bank transfer anymore for like a few days, maybe even a week. But once the system were to stabilize, they would probably open it all back up and you would still have all your stuff. At least that's my rosy view of it. How about that? The doom and gloom guy actually having a rosy view of something bad. But it's important to stress that David Webb, the author of the Great Taking books, really stresses that this could happen, not that it will happen. And that's why my theory of that, yeah, it could happen, but probably won't happen, I think is pretty on track, because it just doesn't seem like a good idea or in the best interest of anyone. Like, yeah, sure, you know, the richest people in charge of all these institutions might make a run for it with all of our money. But where are they going to go, guys? If they have everything, right, there's going to be nowhere left to go. Like, they're not going to be able to go to their favorite restaurant anymore and go spend their billions or trillions, because they're going to be out of business. They're not going to be able to take a private jet anywhere unless they own the jet. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to a place where everything's shut down because every business and person involved in making that business run just lost everything. You see what I'm saying? Like, the logic doesn't add up of how this could really all work in the end. Just because something's possible doesn't mean it's probable. But it's important to understand that the Great Taking isn't just about a future event. You know, a lot of it is about the structure that we're living under right now, and kind of a wake-up call about how people need to be more independent and unreliant on the system. Like, yeah, of course, everybody needs to have some money invested in the market and retirement account and things like that. There's certain things that you have to do if you want to make it to retirement or whatever. But it's still possible to have assets outside of that system. But people just give up too much of control of everything willingly because they just don't want to deal with it. You know, we already give up direct ownership in exchange for convenience and digital access for all these platforms. People trust these custodians to invest their money and take care of it more than themselves. And so the system doesn't need to steal your wealth. It already controls it from the framework that it's in right now. So the real ownership of everything has been replaced by conditional access based on signing on the dotted line. And this next crisis won't create a new system. It will just simply activate the one that's already been built. So the real question everybody should be asking themselves after hearing about this, if you've never heard of it before, is, do you truly own your wealth? Take a little inventory of all the things that you own and where all of your wealth sits. And if you're broke, obviously it doesn't apply to you, and kind of is a good thing to be broke in this case because there's nothing to take. But if you're not, and you've worked your whole life to get somewhere, then you should be really taking a good hard look at where all your assets are tied up. So many people bank on the stock market and say, this is where I'm going to put everything in there, especially like the retire early people who do the FIRE movement. They put everything in there as fast as possible to retire as fast as possible, but all of that could be taken away in the worst case scenario. Personally, I don't think that the situation we outlined here is very likely. Could some version of it unfold in an all-out crisis situation? Yeah, I think some version of it could, but I don't think it's going to be as dire as what's discussed here, even though it's technically possible and 100% legal. You guys should let me know what your thoughts are about all this down in the comments below. Do you think this is likely to happen? Do you think that it's a little bit overblown? It's going to be more like a version that I described here. Let me know what you think. I'm curious as always, and I appreciate everybody who has sent this story my way over the past year or so, and I'm finally covering it for you. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.